This is a podcast with Steve Flavell from LoopUp and Chris Airy from Compendium Solutions. Welcome to our show, Leaders with Suspicions. I hope you enjoy.
Hello, Steve. Nice to meet you.
Hey, Chris. Good to meet you too.
So, why don't you start off by telling me a little bit about yourself and your role?
Of course. I'm Steve Flavell. I am one of two co-CEOs at a company called LoopUp, and we have been that way since our start 22 years ago now. We've run as co-CEOs together in the business. We were actually the co-founders as well back in the day, and I realize co-CEOs might not work for everyone, but it's 22 years on. It seems to work for us. Yeah.
Why don't we dive straight in on that, and we'll come back to your sort of career path and how you got there. But like you say, people have heard of co-founders, but the people have quite a hierarchical view of business that there should always be one person, as the CEO at the top. But and I can see how co-founders with people having different skills, but everyone being co-CEO, right? So you're all good at marketing, all good at sales, all good at strategy. How does that work?
Well, when we started the business, there was it was a very relevant topic because our resumes looked rather similar. We were both engineers by original training. We both went into strategy consulting. We both went to business school. It was not the classic thing where you might look for complementary sort of hard skills, if you like, on resumes. But we were extremely good friends. We knew each other very well. I guess there's sometimes the challenge is whether you should start business with friends as well. That's another one that's often unlevered. But I think if the person is a really good friend and there's trust there, what a better person to embark on a roller coaster journey of a business with over 22 years. And I think it's that trust and friendship that's led us to still be here together, running it together 22 years on.
So do you have any different flavors of responsibilities, or is it like every decision's the two of you?
We do very much. And, even though our backgrounds were similar, we had different desires in terms of the area of the business we wanted to focus on. So Michael, my business partner, based in San Francisco, he focuses on all the technology in the company, product development, the build, if you like, of what we do, the innovation. And I focus on all of the go-to-market and commercial activities. And I'm also perhaps more involved with our CFO and general counsel as well on the corporate side.
Okay, cool. So tell me a little bit about your career. You mentioned a little bit then about strategy consulting and so on, but in your career, you've gone from that kind of stuff and you've ended up running a product tech business in the telco space. So just tell us about how all of that happened in your journey.
Yeah, left university and, almost fell into, one of the decent jobs that come out of university, which in my case and my business partner's case was strategy consulting. But, I think one of the, apart from the desire to create something and, build something of purpose and interest and build a group of people as well. I think it was a lot of exposure to this type of entrepreneurial activity when we were both at business school. We were both over in California at Stanford. We got a lot of exposure to the startup world over there, how perhaps they approach business, startups and scale ups rather differently to perhaps in the UK. And we were keen to have a crack at it ourselves. When we left business school, we perhaps had too much debt from business school to do that straight away. So we got some proper jobs for a little while, but 7 years on, we came free at the same time. And it was really sort of, if not now, then when, and we were just keen to build a business together. We didn't have a burning sort of business plan that we had to do. And in fact, we got together for about 6 weeks and debated all sorts of things, not by no means all in technology as well, although most were, and that's where we ended up. And 6 weeks later, we took a break, went to Vegas, and it was, I think, like 2 a.m. in the Mandalay Bay where we shook hands on what became LoopUp. And literally 30 seconds later, we had our first investor who was playing blackjack with us. So, for the start.
Come on, you're gonna have to tell us more about this story. I mean, it started to sound like a bit of a joke, right? What happens when you get two strategy consultants in a room? Yeah, and then you ended up in Vegas and make a decision around a blackjack table. You're gonna have to tell us some more about that.
Well, like I say, what we shook hands on really was building a business together and finding a way. It wasn't like we've got this idea and if it works, then great, and if not, we'll say thanks and goodbye to each other and move on. It was we're going to build something together one way or another, and that manifested itself as well. Our first idea, which we thought was a good idea, ended up not being the way forward. But we went hard and fast at it, failed quickly, if you like, and moved on to the next thing together, and with our same group of investors who we rolled over into that idea. And that was the approach we took with investment as well. We raised money off friends and colleagues, really, rather than through professional institutions. At least initially, that changed. But we went with 56 angel investors and told them why we thought it was a good idea and what we would do if it ended up not being, and that was the case. And 2 years later, we got involved in the business that then really did start to grow and that we could scale. And that's where LoopUp came from.
Okay, brilliant. So could you tell me a bit about the industry then? For the listeners who may not be that familiar with the telco industry, and there's so much going on, with many people piling into your space like Zoom. So can you sort of talk a bit about the industry, please?
Of course, yeah. We're in the world of sort of next gen telecoms. And by that, we mean cloud telephony integrated with unified communications products, and in our case, particularly with Microsoft Teams. And that industry is one that it's a really interesting situation, because obviously it's a decades old industry, and you wouldn't think it's particularly exciting as a decades old industry, perhaps, but far from it. This is a $30 billion industry that is going through fundamental restructuring, actually on a couple of dimensions, in a very short space of time. And with restructuring in something of that size, comes lots of opportunity. Of course, lots of competition as well. We can come on to that, but lots of opportunity. You have a whole restructuring of telecoms from company premises to the cloud, first of all. So companies stripping out all of the on-premises equipment, the so-called PBXs that sit on every site, historically, and in corporates' offices and sites. All those can come out. They can save an awful amount of money, as well as providing service to their users ubiquitously. Telecoms need no longer and is no longer fixed to a phone or a desk. You can take and make calls from wherever you have internet. And with that, in the post-pandemic world of hybrid workplace, that's essential, really. So that restructuring is now very well formed, but it's been part of the opportunity that we've leveraged. The second big restructuring that's more nascent in this huge industry is telecoms not being seen as a standalone capability as it has been for the prior decades. You now have products like Teams that out of the box do almost everything. They're so-called unified communications, but out of the box, they do everything apart from telecoms. So it actually isn't quite unified. And that's what we do in the second restructuring. It's the integration, the addition of telecoms into that UC product to make it actually now truly unified. And that's the proposition fundamentally. We put a twist on it at LoopUp because with an opportunity of that size and that growth comes a lot of competition. So we had to think about how we were going to set ourselves apart in such a situation, and we went for multinationalness. So offering large multinational companies, that's our target market, the opportunity to, for the first time, consolidate how they buy and manage their telecoms all around the world, rather than having to buy off BT in the UK, Verizon in the US, Orange in France, Telstra in Australia. I could go on, rather than having to have 25 vendors around the world, with the technology as it now exists, you can consolidate that now into one global provider. And that's our twist on this huge restructuring space.
So how do you go to market with that? Because I guess it's quite a complicated, sophisticated offering that has certain target client bases and not other.
Yeah.
Not others. So how do you segment your potential customers and how do you go to market?
Well, the segmentation is simpler than the start of your question. The segmentation is quite straightforward because our differentiation, the multinationalness, works clearly better the more multinational the company is. The more operations they have in different countries, the more value we bring with our proposition. So the segmentation and targeting is actually quite straightforward. What's perhaps more difficult is the first part, how big a deal is this? How big an undertaking is it to win one of those customers? And there's lots of elements to that. It's actually not a big project necessarily. We just rolled out a global corporation in about 20 countries in 3 months. It doesn't have to be a long, protracted project. This can be done, given it's all in the cloud, and you don't have to go on site anymore necessarily. It can be done actually very efficiently as a project. But the challenge for us, when we got into it at least, was how do you persuade companies of that size to trust an entrant, a challenger, if you like, in that market with their global dial tone, their global phone capability? I mean, it's such a business critical capability that was the challenge when we entered the market. We were lucky that we got into this 4 years ago now, 4.5 years ago, and we'd built a reputation in a related industry, which was the world of remote meetings. I can come back to that. That was impacted by the pandemic. That's a story in and of itself. But we'd built a decent reputation through that, I think a good reputation through that prior business activity, and it gave us inroads. And the proposition was strong enough that we at least were able to persuade companies to kick our tires. And when they kicked our tires, they liked the sound of the rubber. It was what they feared, which was, are we going to be able to look after them sufficiently around the world? They found exactly the opposite, which was we were used to looking after customers who are large, actually in our prior business, large law firms. We served 25 of the world's top 100 law firms last decade for their conference calling and remote meetings. And if you think about those calls, deal calls with perhaps 2 sets of clients, lawyers, bankers, debt providers, VCs, private equity, etc., there's an exceedingly high duty of care in that industry, on the spectrum of communications, and that was in our blood. So when we got into telecoms, the sort of care that we had grown up being used to giving our customers was deemed, oh my God, this is great. And the tire kicking led to rollouts and wins across the world that we were then able to leverage through references to move on at a higher pace. So it grew from that legacy business in a way.
And that integration piece you were talking about with Teams, yeah. I can see how a relationship with Microsoft, which is very popular in the corporate world, is a good one. But do you have issues there by looking close to Teams when you might want to partner with other people in that technology ecosystem?
It's a constant debate actually as to whether we should broaden out beyond Teams. And I think when we got into this 4.5 years ago, into this telecoms multinational cloud telephony part of the business, the thinking was that we would broaden out. We would integrate with Cisco's WebEx calling type capability, a similar, Cisco's equivalent to Microsoft Teams, if you like, that we would integrate with Zoom and broaden out that platform in that sense. As it turns out, we haven't done that because the market need hasn't necessitated that in our segment. In our segment of the large multinationals, Teams is so dominant now. You find it 90+% of the time. And in our product roadmap, we've never actually been able to justify that broadening out to other platforms in our segment. And we've stuck just with the Microsoft relationship. you know, there's always a question perhaps as to how secure is that if you know, what if Microsoft wants to get into this themselves? And but you know, I think it's almost one of the last areas of technology that I think Microsoft would want to do that. You know, it's a regulated industry in every country around the world. It's not software, and that's not, you know, the top priority of someone like Microsoft. Far from it, the exact opposite. And both in their communication and strategy, it's clear that they have opened up their platform for other people like us. There's about 100 partners that offer that telecoms integration into Microsoft Teams. They've opened up their platform to allow that, so that they don't have to do it themselves. And they still absolutely monetize it because they're earning money through license extensions, but without having to get involved in the dirty work, if you like, and having to look after regulation in every country around the world. So I think it is competitively secure in that sense.
So if we could move on to talent then. So that journey must be quite interesting. You just talked about regulation, different countries, understanding telco procurement, telco rates, understanding collaboration technologies. What is your approach to talent? Where are your people? How do you make all of that work?
Well, first of all, we've got a great team. They're a, you know, fantastic group that have been on average with the company an awfully long time. And you know, they're our biggest asset for sure. But there's been challenges because, as I alluded to earlier, we haven't always been in this business. It's only been 4.5 years out of our 22. And we did something related, but from a talent and people sense, rather different previously. You know, we were in the world of conference calling and remote meetings. And at one point we had close to 300 people in that industry. We had a sales team of about 100 people, and they were a wonderful gang of young graduates, actually. Of our 100 people in our sales organization, there was only one that we didn't hire out of university. We hired all young, we trained up, many stayed for many years. You know, we have, from the original intake, we still have 2 or 3 of them, you know, that have been with the company now for about 15, 16 years. And that organization, as wonderful as it wasn't the right one when we transitioned into multinational cloud telephony. Selling into the CIO group for an absolutely business critical capability of global dial tone, global phone calls, global numbers, you know, is a different sales proposition requiring different experience and a broader, you know, wider knowledge of IT, security, everything that comes with it, versus our quite specific proposition from the world of conference calling and remote meetings, where you could train people up on a really very specific story and make them very successful. In this capacity, we now have around 10 rather than around 100 much more senior salespeople, some of which we retained from the previous 100 and have grown through that business transition, but others of which we've hired in. So there have been talent challenges in that business transition for sure. The associated challenges have been with you know, one fast growing revenue line item in cloud telephony, but one declining revenue item from our legacy remote meetings, and managing that financial transition in terms of size of workforce, you know, has also been a challenge. I think we've been somewhat lucky in that endeavor, in that, you know, people have been able to see the successful transition happen as those changes have come along. So the story that comes with it, the true story that comes with it, is there for everybody to see. And it's not like you're having to hide anything, which I think matches our style of, you know, Mike and I as leaders in the company, and the leadership group in general, which is to try and be very open with the team. And there were some limitations to that in the period that we were public, but prior, when we were private, and now that we're private again, we've come off the stock market.
Okay.
It's conducive to much more transparent and open sharing of information with the team as a whole.
So in terms of talent and, in the sales end, there's quite a lot of going on about AI and customer success in a similar way. Which kind of role do you find the trickiest to find, or which ones are the ones under the most pressure from change in AI and technology?
Yeah, I think we're quite lucky when it comes to AI, in that there's lots of businesses that are, of course, thriving. Some of them are thriving extremely quickly under the opportunity of AI. Some of them are thriving and shrinking very quickly under the opportunity of AI as well. I think we're rather lucky, which is that our fundamental customer value proposition isn't impacted by AI. It's almost like the second best outcome. Okay, if you've got a very fast growing AI proposition, that's wonderful. But almost second best is to have a proposition that really isn't impacted. And that's our situation. Where AI comes in for us is in the operations. So, we are able to scale very efficiently by deploying business automation AI in our operations. And that's really the main impact of AI on our business. For example, I think we can scale our business in the next 2 doublings over the next 2 years without really having to add tremendously to our operations team. Yes, we'll have to add to our go-to-market team, but not really to the operations team, because the AI and automation of processes can scale with us.
So that operations team, I presume, is 24/7 and scattered around the world, or at least consolidated some support centers.
Follow the sun, round the clock, handovers every 8 hours. It's a critical duty of care because of the business criticality of the capability. Versus our old business, there's one benefit, which is in our old business, we were supporting end users in the world of conference calling. In our new business, we support the IT leadership team, who then do their internal support themselves. So there are fewer contact points, but they're very important contact points that have to be responded to extremely quickly. So yes, 24/7, high quality support. With some of it self-serve, but always able to get a person when you need one, and not trying to hide behind an online barrier.
So in terms of that distributed organization, how do you lead, motivate, enthuse, keep aligned a globally diverse workforce?
Well, I think we had a good start on that because we were a remote meetings business in our younger days. So we were very used to working remotely and online even before the pandemic made it the norm for everyone. We'd had years of doing it, so I think we had a good head start. Communication, though, is key. I think you need to, particularly at this stage of the business now, where we're scaling. We have a absolute fit on product market fit, and it's now a question of scaling the go-to-market. We need to empower our people. That we need to empower them ever more to be able to make good decisions themselves on a day-to-day basis. And communication across the team and helping them to understand why always, why are we doing what we're doing? What is the underlying reasons for things, so that you're not giving them just tasks and like spec sheets or anything like that. You're giving them the understanding that they can make good choices in terms of what they find on their everyday days. And that takes time to keep going through the strategy. You almost can't go through it enough. You have to keep, almost on every all hands call, there will be some element about the company strategy. Sometimes we take more time over it than others, but with that ingrained, you can then break that down into how that strategy impacts the whys of particular projects, and it's easier to do from there. So I think getting people to understand that why is at the heart of our style and methods and processes.
But the culture is also quite difficult to do over online meetings. So how do you build your company culture, and the approach to innovation, and you just talked effectively about empowerment, right?
Mm.
But it's a different thing for somebody to say on a call, I empower you, and them to feel, because they've met you, that they
It,
believe it.
it can't just be words. In fact, I can't remember when we've ever used that word actually in practice with the team. It's a description of it from looking in, but um, the empowerment comes through the understanding. And yes, there has to be a people element to it as well. We try and get people to come into the office as often as they want. Certainly, when it's needed. So we do give a lot of flexibility and freedom to how and where people work. But most people come in a couple of days a week. They always come in for the meetings they have to come in for. We still do a fair amount of social events. There's something every month, for example, in the London office, which is our headquarters. Yesterday was the summer party. We had a good attendance on that, and it's of course still an important part of the mix. I think there's different types of work that are more productive under different states. You can get so much done remotely in some ways. You go meeting after meeting after meeting, which can be a bit of a grind, but you get through so much in a day when you're online and remote and not having to move between meetings. But at the same time, when you're discussing something of more underlying importance, or really trying to get the whys into people, getting people in a room with a whiteboard and being able to talk about it over a lunch or a drink afterwards, it's so much more effective for those more critical conversations.
Let's change the tack a little bit. So tell me what the day in the life of a co-founder is, or co-CEO, sorry. The two of you. You're an operational business, but you're also driving and working with some quite big clients, and as you said, global CIOs. What's your day in the life look like? How do you control it? How do you not let it control you?
Well, there's a lot of different aspects to it. So you've got to be across a lot. There's two of us, which helps. We're not each across everything on a day-to-day basis. We certainly involve ourselves in each other's worlds. We don't sit and leave each other to it. We're involved with each other's worlds. But in terms of day-to-day time, it's actually a really helpful aspect to have two co-CEOs. And your day-to-day accountability is therefore half, if you like, of the whole. I try. One of the things I really try and do a lot is go to as many sales meetings as I can, because it's not just an internal. It's far from just an internal job and scope. You're having to set course based on fundamentally your customers' needs, and getting out there and going to as many sales situations as I can, as many channel situations as I can, I think is really helpful, so that you're seeing it firsthand. And I think that's how the gut feel builds, right? We try and make a lot of choices on data, of course, as everybody does, but far from underestimate gut feel. That is, in a sense, accumulated data just from experience, and a big believer in gut feel as well as pure data.
Thank you for that segue to data. So one of the things that we focus on a little bit is what data makes a difference in your business, right? So most companies will have a KPI dashboard or some other formal measures, and there's a bunch of stuff every company has about finances. But which are the key ratios or the key measures that make a difference, or that you focus on as a leader?
Yeah, so our challenge right now is to take the business to the next level of scale. We're currently growing at about £6 million a year growth in the top line, and that's fine, it's good. But our challenge is, how do we get this business to 100 million of revenue in the next 3 years, not 40? And with that, the key metrics tend to be around the unit economics of scaling. So what does it cost? How efficiently are we winning business? That's one of the key ratios. How much investment in so-called cost of customer acquisition cost, does it cost to win how many pounds to win £1 of recurring revenue? or perhaps more to the point, £1 of recurring gross margin. And that efficiency ratio is key, because if you're going to pump more money into your engine to grow it faster, you want that ratio to be efficient, and it's a critical one for us. A second one is, having won a customer, what happens with that customer? And there are probably two key ratios there. Firstly, how long do you keep them, or what percentage churn each year? And we are super lucky with this ratio. We have zero ever customer churn. We've been in this industry now for 4.5 years, and we have still never lost a customer, not a single one. So, long may that continue. And, it's an easy ratio to measure right now, but, it's not going to last forever, right? And that's going to be a critical ratio when we start to have to measure it. Let's hope it's not for a while. More importantly, perhaps in our current situation than the gross churn, is a ratio that we call net revenue retention, which is, if you look at, say we look at the customers that we had 1 year ago, and ignore the customers we've won over the last year, just what are the ones we had 1 year ago? If their revenue was 100 a year ago, what is it now? Now, the good news is we're not losing any of them, but what's happened to it? Has it shrunk or has it grown? And our revenue from customers we had 1 year ago goes up 50%. So this NRR, this net revenue retention ratio, is 150%, which is out there. And it's a lovely way to start a year, right? If you start the year and thinking, well, actually, even if I don't win any customers this year, which of course we intend to, I'm going to get good growth, because I know that the customers that I already got are going to, on balance, grow. And so I think those three ratios are going to be key for us. The efficiency of winning new customers. Let's hope we continue not to lose any as the second one, but definitely relevantly, what internal growth do we get from within our existing customers?
And is that because you've been lucky or smart about your customers and picking the ones that are likely to grow? Because I'm sure not all businesses are always growing.
Yeah, look, there's an element of luck in everything, of course, but I think the driver of the zero churn is what I alluded to earlier, which is we look after these customers in a way they're not really used to in the industry. Look, forgive me, all other telecoms companies, and I'm sure there are exceptions to this, but it's not exactly the industry where you expect to have wonderful customer care, right? It's not known for that. And we've come into this industry from very different origins where, as I say, that duty of care on multi-party legal conference calls was so high. And transferring that approach, that sort of ingrained customer care, over to this industry, I think is the primary driver of our zero churn. In terms of growth from within and that ratio, there's a clear driver to it, which is we serve multinational businesses. And when we win one, it's unusual to win the whole lot at once, because they have 20, 30 individual phone contracts in every country around the world with different companies. That's our whole proposition. It's, we can get rid of that mess for you. We can consolidate that. And but with that, of course, comes growth over time, because those contracts come round for renewal at different points in time. So, as the German contract finishes, they're brought over onto the global LoopUp contract, and you get a lot, therefore, of growth from within. That's where it essentially comes from.
Okay, that makes more sense. Right, I understand. Yeah, so it's about that effectively the expansion within a client, rather than you've got it all day one. Understand?
Yeah, it's more the nature of the proposition in a way, rather than raw luck.
Okay. Yeah. So really, given what you've said, your key focus is on the growth side. Yeah, I mean, you've got to maintain the other aspects of it. So
yeah, we're very focused. Yes, we do still run this legacy business, and it's a valuable business in that it generates quite a bit of cash for us to invest into the multinational cloud telephony business. But in terms of growth businesses, we are totally focused on one product in one industry.
And so, in terms of winning new clients, is it about brand awareness? Is it about all the marketing automation and sales automation that's out there at the moment? Is it about relationship building and getting past the procurement wall of defense? Or is it about building relationships with procurement?
Well, I think it starts from just the industry setting. You know, companies are really having to move their telecoms to the cloud. They're not having to integrate it with Teams, but it makes so much sense, right? You know, why would you manage Teams in a nice global, consistent way and then want to have 20 disparate telcos underneath? You know, it doesn't make any sense. You know, it makes sense to integrate it in and to manage it in a consistent multinational way, just like you do Teams. So the go to market starts with that. You know, there is an absolute market pull for Teams integrated telephony, and yeah, you know, as people realize it's possible, the global consolidation of it. So we're lucky that we have a lot of inbound opportunities into our pipeline. Nearly all our pipeline is inbound driven, where, you know, they've read something about us online from one of our blogs or, you know, webinars that we do or something else, and they find us actually via Microsoft, because Microsoft has an organized program for this capability. It's almost like a shop window called Operator Connect, where they profile all of the partners that offer it. And, you know, we're the most multinational, so, you know, that profiling draws the relevant people to us. And, you know, that's half the battle, right? Getting in the door with those opportunities that come inbound. Then you, of course, you have to put your proposition over to those customers, but the proposition's pretty straightforward, right? It's do you want to simplify your telecoms by consolidating it into Teams? It's pretty obvious. And, you know, it doesn't require a detailed business case, because the cost savings of ripping out all that equipment around the world, you know, it's too obvious to have to work out. You know, it's not like you have to put numbers on it, it's clear. Yeah, I think the time consuming bit and the challenging bit is, you know, making people comfortable. They can rely on us, LoopUp, because they often haven't heard of us. Like they've heard, of course, would have heard of BT or Verizon or something. You know, should they entrust that critical capability to us? That's the biggest challenge. But it's getting easier and easier as time goes on, and we're winning more and more big multinational customers that we can reference.
Okay. So, I mean, if I reflect back on what you've told me in this podcast so far, you started your business in a way that people don't probably recommend these days if you're doing a startup, right? They sort of work out what a pain point is and then build a team. Whereas you started with, I want to work with somebody I trust,
Yep.
and then we'll work out what the business idea is next. And then you found one niche, and then as that niche changed, you went, all right, let's go and find another one. But if I look back, it's quite, both of them have been very clear, straightforward, business-like propositions. Yeah. So
I can't argue with that.
yeah, and I think you know, we're sort of getting to the sort of knowledge sharing of what you would say to sort of people younger in their career and what and about building their own future and business ventures is, you know, what you've just said is very different to what you would read all over LinkedIn and the internet about how to start a startup. Yeah, you know, you've started with the people rather than market pain or the product market fit pain. Yeah, that's quite an interesting difference, but it's worked for you.
We did, you know, I would advocate that as well. I agree it's not always the way by any means, but I think it's a really good way to start with people you trust and investors you trust as well. But then it is important then to get to the pain point. You know, you have to find the pain point. It's no good starting with the product or the technology and trying to think what to do with it. You know, you've got to come up with the why. That's at the heart of it. You know, why are you doing what you're doing? But, you know, I think you know, it's easier to come up with the why and to come up with the pain points when you've got a good team.
So, just in terms of passing on wisdom, is there anything that in your life in business that you've learned the hard way that you wish you'd learnt in a different way that you could pass on to the listeners?
Wow. Well, we've had some rough times along the way. We're in a very good phase now. We've got a second business, if you like, that's now growing really, really well, and it's exciting. But there's been some really rough times. We were lucky enough to float actually in 2016. We were the first IPO after the Brexit vote, and we got out on the AIM market, and for 2 or 3 years it was great. We were very well respected and valued. I think we got to a market cap of close to $500 million, and then the pandemic hit, and it killed our business. I mean, it killed that first business. It was really rough. Conference calling and meetings went from a business in its own right to just a feature set within Zoom or Teams, right? It's standalone products didn't have a place anymore. So we went from a 50 million pound revenue business to a quickly shrinking one, and we had to work out what to do about it. I mean, what is there a lesson from that? It's tough, right? I mean, it's very easy to say, you should look for the opportunity to exit at the right time, but I don't really think we could have foreseen that, honestly. So I struggle to say it's a business lesson, but I think what was important was, again, coming back to the way we started, which was we agreed we were going to build a business. So we didn't get put off by that. It was more than a hiccup, right? It was a huge business that shrunk quickly, and we had to build one alongside it that was going to grow quickly. It was like turning the volume down on your hi-fi or something, but now the volume's going nicely up again. But that was a tough time with financials and the team, and I think the lesson really, I think, was communication all the way through with the team as to what was going on. We arguably stayed on the stock market for too long. That shrinking business, we were like a cash cow with a startup stuck on for 2 years after the pandemic, and that was not the right business to try and get funded on the stock market. They're not looking for that. So I think one lesson is make sure you're in the place where you can access the investment you need, because we were blocked from the right sort of investors for a couple of years, and we had to go. If it's painful to get a business floated, I assure you it's far more painful to get it delisted. And right. That was a very difficult time, where not all investors wanted that, of course, because a lot of public market investors can't hold private stock, and it was a difficult time where you announce you're going to go off the market. What do they do with their shares? But from the business point of view, from shareholders' point of view, more holistically, it was absolutely the right call. And you've got to be structured and in the right place for the stage of company that you're at. It's just so happened that 18 years after startup, we needed to go back to the world of growth stage private investment rather than public institutional investment. But I think perhaps a takeaway is just make sure you're taking investment from the right sources, people you trust, because they're just in a different way, but just as important to the team you're working with. And that trust is really, really important.
Okay.
For when times get tough.
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved in businesses where the investors wanted the business to go in a certain way, and that they weren't viable ways. And then when you've got multiple investors, as you did at the start with 56 angel investors, I think we were probably not too far away from that. The divergence of opinion is actually quite difficult at times. So
yeah,
I'm actually quite nostalgic.
That method allowed us to go at our own pace. I think if we'd got institutional sort of VC investment involved earlier, at that startup stage 20 years ago, as lots of companies would do, the more normal route, if you like, there would have been pressure to go at this idea wholeheartedly. I mean, we did go at it wholeheartedly, but carefully financially. And it gave us a route to then change direction and go at something else very quickly. Whereas I think there would have been too much pressure just to go all in on that idea. And okay, if it fails, it fails, and that company's dead, and maybe you go off and do another one. But we were able to keep the company alive and change directions within the company through the investment and the types of investors that we brought in.
Okay. I was actually quite nostalgic for your old audio conferencing facility because it was an era. Many of the people watching this probably won't remember the era of you're driving your car and you're on a conference call, yeah,
Absolutely.
or on public transport on a conference call, and you actually can't do that with a lot of the modern tools like Teams. They just need too much bandwidth for our mobile network in the UK around motorways and public transport. So it's an era that will never happen again.